Hi. So today I'm going to walk you through a game proposal and a game design document. I'm going to be using this is a couple of years old, but what I used in school when I had to do some game design courses. The version you use might be slightly simplified, might not necessarily include as much information, but this will give you a good idea of what to start with, and I'll be expecting some of the core information that I'm mentioning here as we go through it. So, name of the game, followed by, name of the team, whatever you want to name your team. Um, Team in detail, general information about the game. And this is where game design also has has a fun little bit of marketing in it. So you got to think about that sort of stuff as you design the game. So tagline, puzzle solutions through enemy possessions. This is like the thesis of the game. Genre is platformer. That's when we spoke about this last time. Sometimes we refer to this as mechanics or genre, and this can get a little tricky, but puzzle or platformer, puzzle platformer, like there's a myriad of genres and there's a bunch of different ones. And remember that since this is a proposal, things might shift. Platform PC, I expect this to be a platform. I don't expect as opposed to mobile, we're not building mobile games. Targeted market. This is an important thing to think about. So ESRB ratings, if you just look up the ESRB, you will see the Entertainment Software Ratings Board. And you can look really quickly at like the rating categories, and you'll see that they've got a couple of different. Where's this? Sorry, but if you look through content description, learn more about ratings. So if you look over here, you'll see that they've got some basic ratings. And then each one will be explained in more depth. I don't want you're obviously not submitting your game to get rated. That costs a lot of money and is entirely unnecessary for a game like the ones we're making here. But think about these categories of the rating system, or if you're more familiar with the film rating system, you can think about that. And this will give you a basic idea of, hey, and then you can also see that there are content descriptors here, and this is actually really helpful. Just like think about the kinds of things that might affect the rating of a game, and then keep in mind that when you rate a game, when a game is being rated a certain way, you also have to gear the content towards that category of person. So if you're saying that it's like a teen game, like a game that's rated teen, you don't want it to be babyish but also contain blood, so therefore it gets rated teen, right? That arguably could end up being a pretty big problem. You have to think about how the tone and the target audience and the tone of the game, which would affect the rating, how those two mesh, and make sure they mesh appropriately. And this is just like a plays like is they tell you to do this in marketing. You don't always have to do this, but sometimes you want to say like this game meets this other game is a very common way they expect you to sell things or like describe things in an elevator pitch, which is what it's called. Which is, if you met someone in an elevator, how would you describe your game for them? Moving right along. So story outline. This is like just the basic idea of the story, and you might go into more depth here. I don't know if you intend to do a story-heavy game, but even if you don't, this might just help get the basic, like you're still going to have a couple of bullet points about that. And I do expect that to be included in the game, even if it's like really a minimal story, like for example, match 3 game like Candy Crush or something. You're still, making through a candy factory, trying to sort things and organize things, right? There's still a story there, even if it's very minimal and doesn't really affect much. Setting and reference art. So this is where we start talking about reference art, which is something I mentioned at the end of last class and something that you really should think about. You think about this on 2 levels. One is the art style, what you expect, like the sort of artistic influences, like what we're showing here, but also at the same time, you think about what kind of art are you going to use. So for our projects, if you're not going to have a team artist and you're going to or more than one team artist, and you're mainly going to use assets from somewhere else, start looking around and doing your searches for the assets you're going to use as part of like this reference and as part of this concept art and artistic setting and things like that, right? So this is our concept art, and concept art often has like a bunch of radically different ideas that then either and some will get thrown out and some will get incorporated, right? Like for example, here we've got like this cute little dude next to like this really big scary guy or like this evil-faced bit of black, and you don't even know. We don't even know which one it's going to be until the end of. Until later on in the process. So at the pitch, at the start of it, this is kind of what we're thinking. Again, a lot of this stuff can change. Main game mechanics. This is the core of the game, and this should be your driving idea. You should have a concept here before you make your proposal. Even if parts of this concept get thrown out down the line. So here, for the example, what we did was we said, okay, death, that like dying will reward you, right? And what you actually do is you possess enemies, and then you can jump from enemy to enemy, and that was the concept of the game. And so we had a couple of like core mechanics here, like possession of enemies, but possessions have to have a limit, otherwise you're just, you know, consistently running from place to place, and we can restrict healing, all that sort of fun stuff. And then we started doing related games, right? And this is another part of your planning process, the same way you have influence in terms of, oh, my art is going to be influenced by like these images, right? My art is going to be influenced by these images. Then you also go, hey, my games are going to be influenced by these games, right? And so we have like Kirby meets Dark Souls, so we mentioned both Kirby and Dark Souls here as well, and explain what it is from these games that we want to pull out, right? So we described the game a little bit. It's a 3D action game released in 2011, developed by From Software, hardcore third-person action game, right? Death happens very often, and slow and strategic approach to combat. I mean, we're saying that like those are the things that we're taking out. That death is happening often, and there is a slow and strategic approach to combat. Next is the Kirby series, right? These are 2D platformer. So the first two things are literally just the kind of game it is in one sentence, and not even a full sentence, and then who created the game, because we want to give credit where it's due. And then we say, hey, you copy, and then, hey, in Kirby, you can always copy the ability from enemies. You've got a fairly simple moveset, which means it's not like, oh, I have to learn a bunch of complex controls. I've got a very simple set of controls, but the fun of it is figuring out how those things interact, and those are the things we want to steal from there. Another game is called Crawl, which is a party action game released in 2014, right? Once again developed. It's asymmetric. It's 1 versus 3. Player 1 is a hero, the other players are monsters, and once again, it's another example of like a lot of different movesets that are... It has a lot of variety of limited movesets, right? So you possess 1 to 3 of your characters, but at the end of the day, it's like a big thing that is... There's a lot of possibilities, but everyone has a very simple setup. Possession mechanics, so this is where, so that was, we talked about the games, our game references and other things we're taking from, and then we think, hey, this is like the big idea we have where you can possess other characters, and these are the things that we're thinking about related to it. So this is where you start talking about, hey, this is what's going to be unique about our game, and this is the different things that we're thinking about. So either you can, so if you're going to possess, you can either possess on death, or you possess on kill, or there's a loadout system, which means that killing enemies adds them to your inventory, and then kind of like you might have weapons in other games, you'd have enemies here. And obviously, since this is a presentation, when you do your presentation in front of the class for the midterm, you're going to be explaining these things to me, even though they're just going to be bullet points on your thing. So the important point here, what you're going to be doing, similar to what I'm doing here, is you're going to be taking a core mechanic and explaining, hey, these are our current thoughts early on in the process. Game prototype, if you have the ability to do this at this point, I'd recommend it. You'd literally just record game, like create something, record footage, and present it. I'm not expecting you to have a game prototype for our proposal. That's something that's going to come a little later, or when you're a little bit more skilled with video game development, it's something you'll be able to throw together pretty quickly. This is the schedule, how you plan to schedule things out, and this is the kind of thing where I'd like to see one in general, but I'm not going to hold you to it, and you don't have to worry too much about it. But it's the kind of thing you should be thinking and you should be planning as an exercise of planning a project. And that's the end of it, right? So you've got, going back to the top, we've got name of the game, meet the team, some general information, right, which is the tagline, the genre, the platform, targeted market, and it plays like X meets Y, like one game meets another. We go through a story outline. If you want to go through settings and reference material, this I expect. I want to see some sort of reference art. I want to be able to get a vibe for the game based off of this. I want to see some concept art. If you already have minis or something like that, between setting and reference art and concept art, I'd like to have a good idea of what we're dealing with. Main game mechanic. This is, hey, what kind of game are you doing? Tell me about the game on its own. And then those related games that were mentioned above, and possibly some additional ones. I want to know a little bit about the game, and I want to know the parts of that game that you are pulling out. And then it's like, hey, this is the core mechanic. This is the thing that's interesting. These are some ways we're thinking about it, but we're not sure yet. And then don't worry about the prototype, and think about the schedule. If you want to put one down, you can put one down, but I'm not going to require that. Now that is the proposal. Here's what an actual game design doc is going to look like. And this is the kind of thing that will evolve and will change. This is from the same game, so it'll give you an idea of like how these two pair together. Table of contents, right? Executive summary, overview, story, art, technology and software architecture, level design, and meeting summaries. Executive summary is 1 to 3 sentences that describe the game really quickly. Right? In Viral Course, you play an upbeat parasite in a dark and twisted world. Perfect. I already get the tone from that. To survive, you need to possess enemies. That's what I got to get through. Once your host dies, you jump to the next host. That I've explained the core mechanic in 1 sentence. This is a 2D puzzle action platformer that tells an engaging story while challenging players through gameplay. Perfect. I've just described, like, you know what to expect from the game now that I've said those few words. Overview, this is a lot more depth, and I will make this available to you guys if you want to take a look at it, but this will just be a lot more depth, giving a bit of an overview about it. Then there's the story, tone, themes, world, characters. For this game, by the way, since it was like just being done in 1 semester, the overall story was written had 5 different levels and 5 different worlds, but practically because it was in a class, for the scope we only did one level just to give a feel for the game. And there's just a bunch of other stuff. There's just hey, this is characters and things like that, and this is where, hey, these are actually the first really fleshed out bits of the game. It's so much easier to write down words than to write a bunch of code and see if that works, and that's what this kind of thing does. Art, this talks about our art in more depth. Once again, there's a lot of, and this is kind of an important bit here, there's some technical information in this one where what we did and what you really need to do is you need to set up a set of rules for your art so that your art doesn't look mismatched based on sizes. You need to restrict it. Okay, we've got everything is drawn by, let's say, 8 by 8 or multiples of 8. So you've got 8, 16, 32, and 64. Those are all different sizes, but they're multiples of 8, and therefore everything looks good relative to each other. That is an important thing to think about when we come dealing with art, and it's not something that we necessarily dealt with out the gate because we're using predefined assets. So when you start taking predefined assets from different sources, make sure that they line up in terms of sizing. Right, so then it's talking about how the levels will be different and those sorts of things. Here are a few assets, which is, hey, we've already created some, at this point in the development, we'd already created some basic games, because this was the game design document was delivered a little bit later than the proposal. And because of that, we have we can actually show you some of the art for the game. We've got a nice little mouse dude, we've got the main character, and you can see how, if we look back at the concept art, how these became this little guy. And you can see how over here we were talking about a plague doctor for an enemy, and you can see how that became this dude. In order to, so we've come with a few general guidelines for the art department, showing starting with animation. Each monster has a minimum of 6 basic, right? And this is also where you want to limit things in scope so that it's possible. And you'll see a lot of this game design document, which I'm just going to give you the whole thing, gives you a basic idea. There's technology and software architecture. So this is where we start talking about the development, right? So here we used Unity. We specified the exact version of Unity we're using. So for us, you're going to specify the version of Phaser you're using, and specify the IDE you want people to use, especially even if we end up using different computers. So some people have Macs and some people have PCs. You're going to want to specify, hey, this is the development environment, this is the game engine, and this is how we share our code with GitHub, right? You're going to want to specify all that. Next, we're going to talk about level design, right? So this is an important fundamental part because this is the philosophy of designing the game. So there's the artistic side of designing the game and how we do that, and then there's the level design and how we intend to, what we expect the game to look like from a level design document, from a level design perspective, but also this enforces how we design levels, right? We say that every level is going to be a branching map, which means when I design a level, I'm designing a branching map. Then there's meeting summaries, which is just, hey, we had the team met up and we did this and we did that, and we don't really need this part, right? Because you're not doing this based on the meetings, and I'm not going to include the meeting summaries. But the rest of it, I'm going to include just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. In each of these sections, I expect to be there in some form, but obviously, based on the kind of game you're making, you might have one section more than other, right? If you're not focused on art, if you're more focused on something like the mechanics or like the level design, like, oh, we're making a bunch of puzzles. So our art is always going to have, let's say, like if you've ever seen the game Rush Hour. So if you've ever seen this little game, and there's a bunch of like versions of this, but this game is called Rush Hour. And the whole goal is to get the red car out. So the asset, so if you were to make a digital version of this game, then your assets would be really simple, right? You just have a bunch of cars, and you have your red car, and then you'd have like your tile set, which would be your map. And you can experiment a lot more because you'd be doing a digital rather than physical game. But your level design process might be a lot more important than your art design process, because your art design process would be a lot more minimal. And so you might have more of your game design document dedicated to the art than the level. Alright, that is basically what it is. As I said, I'm going to offer you guys the proposal, these two documents. I'm going to upload them as well, so you'll have access to them on Omnivox. And if you have any questions, please reach out.